Hi, and welcome to another weekly roundup of tabletop miniatures gaming on Kickstarter from Rule of Carnage. This week we've got a lot of STL files, a lot of models campaigns, and one accessories campaign. We're going to start off with that accessories campaign, Fantasy Football Skill Bands from Charlie Victor Products. Now, much as you might guess from the title of the campaign, these are a set of small bands you can put around the bases of your miniatures for playing Blood Bowl or similar games of that nature. Note the skills and abilities, the statuses of various models, just to help rather than using tokens or other forms of notation, make things a little bit quicker, probably a little bit slicker. If you're a Blood Bowl player, you might well want to take a look at that campaign. It's a nice way of fancying up your games and saving fiddly tokens on your pitch. Second of all, and following on from that accessories campaign, we have North Warriors, fantasy football teams by Punga Miniatures, slightly confusingly by Fellowship Games. This is a campaign for physical miniatures, not just STL files, for teams of Vikings, Chaos Dwarves, Hussars, and Amazons. And I will say, if you are a Blood Bowl player, if you're even mildly interested in one of those teams, these are some really good-looking, stunning miniatures. They look very high quality. As I say, available as actual completed resin printed miniatures. There's a good range in there, the full set of players you might want for any of those teams, and it's a good solid price as well for a team. And of course there are levels for 2, 3, or the full set of teams. So if you're a Blood Bowl player and you're interested in any of those 4 teams, even ever so slightly, it's a campaign with some really nice looking minis. Well suggest taking a look on that one. Another models campaign is Halflings Hungry Horde Part 3 brackets last by Adam Sadowski. So this is a all Halflings army that would be appropriate for playing something like Warhammer Fantasy Battle, but it would work just fine, probably proxying other armies in other systems, such as Kings of War, or any large mass battle fantasy system. They're fairly old school modeling, but there's a good sense of humor to the minis. They're really nice looking, solid. As I say, it's a campaign for a physical pledge level, and the all-in level looks like a reasonable price for what looks like enough minis for a decent sized 1500, 2000 point Warhammer Fantasy Battle 8th edition or prior army. If you're at all interested in, if not making an actual Halflings army, at least proxying something like Empire in your army, this would do very nicely. Really good looking minis. You might want to take a look. Next up is a rather smaller minis campaign, and that's Sci-Fi Dwarves High Command by Macrocosm. So this is a campaign just for a handful of command miniatures that work very nicely in a 40k squats army. They're good looking, quite old hammer style minis. Yeah, they would work very nicely, as say, in squats in 40k, but any dwarf-ish sci-fi army, yeah, they're solid looking command miniatures. So if you're interested in running dwarves in any sort of sci-fi game system, this is a no-brainer. You definitely want to check in on this campaign for a little handful of command minis to spice up your leadership. So something a little seasonal in the next models campaign, we've got All Hallows Eve by Whitehorn Kraken Games. Now, there's an interesting set of miniatures. There's some pumpkin creatures, some weird little beasties, very old hammer, old school modeling vibe, very weird, out of the way minis. again, this is a campaign that's not necessarily going to be to everybody's tastes, but if you've been desperately looking for a squad of mushroom warriors, then there's not going to be an enormous amount that's going to fill that niche for you, and this campaign's going to do it. It's got some odd little gribbly creatures, some vegetable-based monsters, some fungus creatures, things of that nature. So if you think you might want something a little bit peculiar, some minis that aren't of the normal run, take a little look at this. It's a smallish campaign from what seems to be an indie modeler, so it's well worth taking a little look if your collection spreads to the peculiar and unusual. Last but not least of the models campaigns for this week is Greenskin Wars, the Iron Orcs Army by Diego Serrata Pinilla. Now, this is an unashamedly old school, old hammer style army expansion for some really vicious looking armored orcs, sort of larger, chunkier command or black orc end of the scale. If you're a fan of old hammer modeling, proper old school, thuggish, powerful, brutish looking orcs, then this is a great campaign. They've got multiple campaigns under their belt for miniatures, these guys, and they've got a nice range behind them if you want to look a little bit further into it. But if you just want some big chunky looking orcs that look like they're right out of the golden era of to some old hammer modeling, then take a look at this campaign. So kicking off this week's STL file campaigns is Harvest 4 3D printable wargame miniatures and terrain by Joseph Kujawaski. So this is a campaign for some, I wouldn't go as far as to say generic, but some non-specific sci-fi miniatures. They could step into a 40k proxy role, but also there's some really lovely modular sci-fi terrain in there, set of accessories. So if you're looking to fill out a sci-fi table, there's some really good buildings in there. If you are just looking to round out a sci-fi models collection or bulk out an army otherwise, there's a range of not just armored human sci-fi miniatures, there are mechanical walkers, drones, android dogs. There's a wide range of models that will fulfill a lot of sci-fi wargaming tropes. So take a little look. There's a good solid range here, like I say, from terrain to minis to most things you might want to fill out a sci-fi tabletop. So yeah, check that one out if you're into any level of sci-fi tabletop gaming. Okay, so next up is a very intriguing campaign, Old School Archive by Ill-Gotten Games. So what this campaign is looking to do is to scan in a set of old school hand-modeled miniatures from the history of wargaming, miniatures wargaming, and create them as STL files. So it looks like they're looking to build up a genuine archive of old school minis, which is a really interesting and hopefully laudable thing that they're shooting at here. They seem to be starting slow. There's a bit of a handful of pledge levels here of a range of out of the way old school minis as STL files. I think that any of those minis would be nice to have in a collection. There are some busts as well as some actual gaming minis, but if that's the sort of campaign, sort of aim that you think you would like to back, I think that there's a certain amount of backing for the overall aim of what they're attempting here. So if you would love to have all those out of the way, obscure, old school, hand modeled minis that you love put into STL files, making it available for digital kit bashing, things of that nature, you should definitely have a look in this campaign and consider supporting it, for once, because you really believe in what they're trying to do. So next up is an interesting campaign to mention on Rule of Carnage, and that is Fuel World by U25. Now, as Fuel World, as a campaign name might imply, there's a little bit of a Gaslands theme going on, I think, to this campaign. It's a range of not just minis. So there's some wall rig minis that are built to be digital built and then printed out. There's a whole range of upgrades. There's a massive array of bikes if you're looking for bikes for Gaslands team. And yeah, there's weapon options, all sorts of bits and pieces to stick onto your Hot Wheels or other pre-built car minis. Obviously, these have worked perfectly well with other tabletop car-based war games. I understand that there are some out there, and some people actually choose to play some of them. But, but in all seriousness, it's to do great for car wars, Gaslands, anything of that nature. So take a little look at that campaign. So next up is Total War 1915 by Alphonse Marcel. So this is a campaign for a massive range of miniatures in a 1915 World War sort of setting. What's interesting about it is that they're not all, in fact, by and large, most of them aren't typical fighting armor weapon holding poses. There are injured soldiers, there are soldiers on break, and there are stretch goal levels for surrendering soldiers. So if you're looking to flesh out a range of miniatures from this sort of era to portray the soldiers in situations other than the typical battle ready or in combat poses that you normally see, I'd hardly recommend taking a look at this. There's a really huge range of minis in a fantastically diverse and unusual set of poses. So if you're looking to widen out your collection of minis of that era, I would strongly suggest you give this campaign a look. It's going to have all sorts of bits and pieces that would interest you. So next up is an interesting and possibly slightly more niche campaign. It's Syndra Prime by Imperial Terrain. So this is a campaign for 6mm scale sci-fi terrain. So epic scale. As a possibly a little bit more niche, 6mm scale gaming is not exactly your standard core gaming, but these are some really great looking buildings, and partly because it's a slightly niche end of the gaming market, you might find that you struggle to find terrain to fill out a tabletop at that scale. These models, they look great, the terrain's fantastic, and there's plenty there to fill any size tabletop. So if you are interested in 6mm gaming, I think there's no reason not to give this campaign a good look over and probably a back. So next up is an interesting campaign. It's Titancraft Heroes Custom Miniatures by Andrew Stockton. So this is a campaign attached to a digital platform where you can go on and you can custom build a miniature from a set of digital elements and templates and have it produced and delivered to you. So obviously for larger scale miniatures gaming, which is what we're talking about on this channel, this is going to be for your heroes, your wizards, your leaders, your generals, centerpiece models of your army. But for those models, this is a great way of easily and smoothly putting together a genuinely unique bespoke miniature at a reasonable price without having to get out the green stuff and the modeling tools and all the bits and pieces that we associate with kit bashing and converting. So if that's something that appeals to you, taking a more digital route to personalizing and kit bashing your models, this is probably a platform that you can end up spending a little bit of time and money on. So you may as well jump in now on the Kickstarter and get a pledge level locked in. So next up is campaign that if you're scanning through Kickstarter looking for tabletop miniatures wargaming, you might have scanned right past. It's Tempest Hold RPG book and STL collection by M. Chabot. Now, obviously, that RPG book, it's not necessarily in keeping with the theme of the channel we're looking at here, but the rest of it, the STL file part, is going to be of great interest to any tabletop miniatures gamers. There's some nice minis that range from a stunning undead giant through to smallish potential units or some heroes. But also in the campaign, there is some fantastic terrain. There's a wide range here of really interesting fantasy terrain. And what's nice is that the pledge level comes in at a reasonable price for the amount of minis and terrain and elements you actually get. And if you aren't interested in the RPG book, there is an STL files level only available. So if you have swept past this one because you're not interested in RPGs, you don't think it's for you, I would suggest scanning back over, because if you're interested in STL minis and tabletop miniature gaming, then there is going to be something there for you. So next up is District 1919 3D printable sci-fi Metropolis at War by War Scenery. So this is, I think, primarily aimed at being a terrain campaign. There's some absolutely stunning terrain in this campaign. Interestingly, it's also a slightly unusual sci-fi end of things. I think I describe it as being somewhere between Blade Runner and the sort of darker end of the Star Wars universe. A lot of really nice urban terrain. If you're interested in terrain heavy, building heavy, sci-fi urban skirmish games, these look really nicely modeled. There's some great elements like into building bridges. So, you know, you could really work up some interesting and unusual scenarios and get together some unusual skirmish game urban rule sets for this one. There are also some minis in there. They are not necessarily attached to a specific rule set at the moment. And some of the aliens wouldn't exactly drop into other sci-fi sets, but they're really nice looking minis. And if you're going to be playing a really small scale sci-fi skirmish game with the stunning buildings in there, there's no reason you can proxy them into any given system that you want and start building your own set and sci-fi universe with them. So if you're interested in a set of sci-fi terrain that isn't necessarily grimdark and is something a little bit unusual, a bit more, you know, sci-fi movie feeling, I'd definitely give this one a look. There's some really nice terrain, really nice minis in there. So next up is another slightly unusual terrain STL file campaign. It's Underwater Base Albion 3D printable sci-fi modular terrain by Project Mobius. So what this is a whole bunch of terrain for I would say it's a sort of Moonraker era feeling, James Bondy style underwater base that, you know, your spy might be fighting his way through to confront the evil mastermind. It would work just fine for any sort of sci-fi skirmish game level system that's looking to be set indoors and ideally underwater, but there's a very strong sort of classic era James Bond feel to the whole thing. If you're interested in that sort of slightly pop culture referencey feel to your tabletop, you know, this is not the sort of terrain that you're going to see all over the place. You might want to give it a look. and check it out. It's got a really strong sense of style, and it definitely, knows what it wants to be, and I think it hits that nail right on the head. So rounding off this week is our standard pay what you want campaign. In this case, it is Ida Leon Tavern Building STL Pay What You Want by Kenneth Cruz Sorensen. So much as you might guess from the title of the campaign, it is a tavern piece of terrain for tabletop gaming. It's a pay what you want campaign. So as I always say, it's going to be whatever you consider to be excellent value for an STL file of a tavern to get on your tabletop and put into your fantasy medieval era sort of gaming system skirmish games. So thanks a lot for watching. This has been another Kickstarter roundup from Rule of Carnage, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks. Bye.